Good evening. We're going to start this evening by having Don Hurd, who's our voice of EmpowerU. He's going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and the National Anthem.
Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Welcome to everyone tonight, and welcome to those online as well. I'm Betty Overstreet, EmpowerU's Community Relations Director. This wonderful class tonight ends our 16th semester for EmpowerU. We will be starting our 17th semester on February 26th, so everybody be looking for their calendars. We hope to have a lot more good classes like I think we do every year, but that's my opinion. Now's a good time to give us your feedback. We welcome any comments, good or bad. You can go to info@empoweruohio.org, leave your comments. We also like suggestions for future classes, so this is a good time to send those suggestions in to us, because the board will be meeting in January and putting together our schedule for next year. Also, EmpowerU is run strictly by donations. So towards the end of the class, we will pass around our red buckets. And if you'd like to drop anything in the bucket to help us keep these classes going, any amount is very appreciated. Also, our speaker tonight would like to, President Lincoln tonight will answer any questions that you have, if you would just please hold them until the end of his presentation. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Wait for one of us to bring a microphone to you so that everyone in the room, as well as people online, can hear your question. I'd like to next introduce our team. We have Bill Roll in the back. He's our treasurer. Jay Gronke, who is our producer. Ken Bowman somewhere in the crowd. He's on our board. And then we have our managing board member, Dan Reginald. Please give those people a hand. Missing tonight is our executive director, Nita Thomas, and she's online. So if you would all please just shout out a hello to Nita. Hi, Nita. Next, we have a door prize. We have a framed copy of the Gettysburg Address. Who would like to have that? I'm going to ask you if you would to draw a ticket for me. $607. Last three numbers, 607. Everybody got their ticket out? Nobody has 607? Oh, here we go. In your name? Doug Oppenheimer, congratulations. That's 607. You can keep it. Also, I'd like to announce we have 2 great big cakes in the back. So I hope you're all hungry. We're going to be serving cake afterwards. Be sure that you have a piece or at least take a piece with you. And next, I would like to have Dan Reginald, the managing board member of EmpowerU, come up.
Thank you, Betty. These are the events leading up to the Gettysburg Address, which happened 155 years ago on November 19th, 1863. From July 1st to July 3rd, 1863, the invading forces of General Robert E. Lee's Confederate Army clashed with the Army of the Potomac under its newly appointed leader, General George G. Meade at Gettysburg. Gettysburg is 35 miles southwest of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Casualties were high on both sides. Out of roughly 170,000 Union troops, there were 23,000 Union casualties. That was more than 1/4 of the Army's effective forces. And that night, that day, 28,000 Confederates died or were wounded or missing, more than 1/3 of Lee's army. After 3 days of battle, Lee retreated towards Virginia on the night of July 4th. It was a crushing defeat for the Confederacy, and a month later, the great general would offer Confederate President Jefferson Davis his resignation. Davis refused to accept it. As after previous battles, thousands of Union soldiers killed at Gettysburg were quickly buried, many in poorly marked grave sites. In the months that followed, however, local attorney David Wills spearheaded efforts to create a national cemetery at Gettysburg. Wills and the Gettysburg Cemetery Commission originally set October 23rd as the date for the cemetery's dedication, but they delayed it to mid-November after their choice for speaker, Edward Everett, said he needed more time to prepare. Everett was the former president of Harvard College. He was a former US Senator and former Secretary of State. And at that time, he was the country's leading orator. Everett was the featured speaker at the dedication ceremony at the National Cemetery of Gettysburg, and later he wrote to Lincoln, "Sir, I wish that I could flatter myself that I had come as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes." On November 2nd, just weeks before the event, Wills extended an invitation to President Lincoln asking him formally to set apart those grounds at Gettysburg for their sacred use by giving a few appropriate remarks. Lincoln was extremely frustrated with Meade and the Army of the Potomac for failing to pursue Lee when Lee was forced into retreat. But however, Lincoln was cautiously optimistic as the year 1863 came to a close. He also considered it significant that large Union victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg under General Ulysses S. Grant had both occurred on the same day, July 4th, Independence Day, and the anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. When Lincoln received the invitation to make remarks at Gettysburg, he saw it as an opportunity to make a broad statement to the American people on the enormous significance of the war, and he carefully prepared. The long-running popular legends hold that he wrote this speech on the train while he traveled to Pennsylvania. He probably wrote about half of it before leaving the White House on November 18th and completed it and revised it that night after talking to Secretary of State William S.H. Seward, who had accompanied him to Gettysburg. Lincoln himself had used similar language to the Gettysburg Address before in July 1863 when he spoke to Congress. He had referred to the United States as a democracy, a government of the people by the same people. The radical aspect of the speech, however, began with Lincoln's assertion that the Declaration of Independence and not the Constitution was the true expression of the Founding Fathers' intentions for our new nation. At that time, many white slave owners had declared themselves to be true Americans, pointing to the fact that the Constitution did not prohibit slavery, according to Lincoln. The nation formed in 1776 was dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. In an interpretation that was radical at the time, but is now taken for granted, Lincoln's historic address refined the Civil War as a struggle, not just for the Union, but for the principle of human equality. Late on the morning of November 19th, Everett spoke for 2 hours and gave an ovation from memory on the Battle of Gettysburg and its significance, and the orchestra played a hymn composed for the occasion by B.B. French. Around 3 p.m., the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, rose to address the people at the Gettysburg Cemetery. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln.
Thank you, thank you. Please be seated. As we celebrate my speech on November 19, 1863, this is what I said 77 years ago. Our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, a war testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a battlefield of that great war. We have gathered here to dedicate a portion of that field as the final resting place for those who here gave their lives that this nation might live. It's altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate. We cannot consecrate. We cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is rather for us, the living, to be here dedicated to the unfinished work which they who fought here have so far and so nobly advanced. It's rather for us to be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, but that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth. As I finished that speech, I turned toward Lamont and I told him it didn't scour. Do I have any farmers in the audience? then you know what I mean. For when a farmer would plow, if he went into a field and it was too wet, the soil would stick to the plowshare. If it was too dry, you couldn't get the plow into the ground. But when a farmer says it doesn't scour, it means the soil doesn't turn freely from the plowshare. It's not effective. I thought the speech was a flop. The Chicago Times reporter wrote that the cheeks of every loyal American should tingle at the musings of their so-called intellectual president at Gettysburg. The speech wasn't carried in all the newspapers. But on the morn, I had a message from Everett. He was the speaker who gave a 2-hour message. Edward Everett wrote, and he told me, I would flatter myself if I thought that I had captured in 2 hours the essence of the occasion, such as you did in 2 minutes. Well, I had a few other things to say. What got us to this spot? That we had to establish a national soldiers' cemetery. I think back to the time that I first learned to read, and I came across a book. It was by Weems, and it was called The Life of Washington. And as I read that book, I came across battlefield accounts that told me that men were risking life and limb, their very being, everything that they had. And I wondered, what is it that Washington has that makes them want to do this? And as I grew older, I became more and more aware that it was a vision. It was a vision of a nation and freedom and independence. Many of those battlefield accounts remain with me to this day. But as I grew older, an ever-developing appreciation for their sacrifices came to haunt me. For you see, when we set foot on the stage of existence, we found our account running in the 19th century of the Christian era. We were the proud inheritors of the fairest portion of the earth. If you consider vastness of territory, salubrity of climate, and fertility of soil, we toiled not nor labored for these things. They were bequeathed us by our brave, patriotic, and loyal ancestors, now lamented and departed. For theirs was the task, and nobly they performed it, to avail themselves, and through themselves us, of this goodly land, to establish on the hills and in the vales institutions of government that assured civil and religious liberties heretofore unknown to mankind. And now we have a task, you and I, to pass this on to the last generation that fate should privilege to inherit the earth. Civil liberties, unprofaned by the foot of an invader. Religious liberties, untorn by usurpation and undecayed by lapse of time. And this is a task of gratitude to our fathers, justice to ourselves, duty to posterity, and love for the species in general, which require us faithfully to perform. Now, do I speak this way because I fear that there would be some Bonaparte step the Atlantic, put a track on the Blue Ridge, dip his cup in the Ohio? Never, not in a trial of 1,000 years, would any Bonaparte risk such a feat. Not with all the armies of Africa, Europe, and Asia, the treasuries of the whole world, our own accepted. You see, my friends, we live as a nation of free men. We must be the author and the finisher of our destiny. If destruction be our lot, it shall be that we have allowed insurrection to rise up among us. We shall have committed suicide. Then the question remains, how shall we protect against it? I have a grave concern. I was reading in the newspapers that a man in Mississippi had a license from the state to gamble. And a group of people got together, a mob, and decided that gambling was wrong and the world would be better off to not have this individual. They gathered him up, took him out, and hung him on a tree. There was no due process of law. The mob's verdict took the place of a reasoned magistrate. And in St. Louis, a mulatto that the mob thought had murdered someone was chained to a tree and set afire. Again, he didn't have his day in court. And where is the public outrage? We, the people, must preserve our Constitution. We, the people, must make certain that laws are upheld. And how do we go about this? Let each one of us, as the patriots of '76 did to the Declaration of Independence, swear to uphold our Constitution and laws by our life, our liberty, and our sacred honor. Let every American mother whisper to the lisping babe that prattles on her lap a reverence for the Constitution. Let it be printed in the primers and spelling books and in the almanacs. Let it be taught in the colleges and the universities and the seminaries. Let it be preached from the pulpits, assured in every law passed in our legislative halls and in every decision in our courts of justice. In short, let it become the political religion of this land. And let each one of us, whether young or old, healthy or lame, rich or poor, regardless of race, color, creed, or condition, sacrifice unceasingly upon its altars. Little did I think when I spoke those words in January of 1838 that I would be standing here today as your president, and that we would be engaged in this great civil war, a war that is testing whether a nation of free men can govern themselves, or is such a concept an absurdity? Oh, there are many that wish this great American experiment would fail. You see, that's what we are living, the great American experiment. We are just a young nation. And all of these civil and religious liberties we enjoy are not available in other lands. Every time that someone from Europe, Africa, or Asia decides they want to venture to America and partake of this opportunity, Europe is the less, or Africa is the less, or Asia is the less. We bank on those folks who come here to perform and add to the fabric of our society, to make us stronger. When I was running for president, I said that I would not interfere with the institution of slavery where it existed. And in my first inaugural address, I assured the rebels of the South. You see, there were 7 states that had already seceded. They thought. I said, you can't secede. But I promised them that I would hear any grievance they had. If they felt their constitutional rights were being ignored, come see me. But none of them did. I had a message from Major Anderson of Fort Sumter that he was in desperate need of supplies. I asked, how does this happen? And they said, well, President Buchanan had the same message. He sent a boat with some supplies to the harbor, but he met with some Confederate ships. He turned around and came back. You're a soldier at Fort Sumter. You're starving to death. Do you want your president to sit back and do nothing? I haven't had a soldier say yes yet. And so I went to my cabinet and I said, we will restock Fort Sumter. Oh no, they cried, it'll be certain war. I said, I'll take the responsibility. I sent Governor Pickens a message. I said, I'm going to restock the fort with food, blankets, clothing, and medicines. There will be no munitions on board. And on April 11th, 1861, we pulled into the harbor. April 12th at 4:30 in the morning, the Confederates began bombarding Fort Sumter with cannon. Major Anderson endured 30 hours of bombardment before he managed to get a ceasefire. When he got his troops out, I ordered 75,000 troops for 90 days. I thought it would be a limited war. Surely there are enough loyal Unionists in those rebel states that they can convince their leadership of the futility of this way. But I was wrong. we didn't have that many. And I had to order another 250,000 troops. And that wasn't enough. Kentucky decided that they would not provide one soldier to fight their southern brethren. And so Ohio, Governor Dennison, said he would provide the Kentucky quota so that we had troops. I wrote back to Governor McLaughlin of Kentucky and I said, I won't interfere with your neutrality so long as you don't harbor the rebels. And then what happened? The rebels came in to Columbus, Kentucky, and on the bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River, they established what they called the Gibraltar of the West. They put 143 cannon up there to blast our boats out of the Mississippi River. They built a chain to go across the Mississippi. Every link of that chain weighed 20 pounds, was 11 inches long and 8 inches wide. We didn't know it at the time, but the chain was so heavy, it broke under its own weight. But when I got word about the Gibraltar of the West, I ordered General Grant, who was in Cairo, Illinois, to move into Paducah, Kentucky, and take control of the Tennessee River and move up and push the rebels out, which he did. And when he was fighting for Fort Donelson, the commandant of Fort Donelson sent a message to Grant. He asked for a ceasefire in order that they could negotiate some sort of a truce. And Grant wrote back and said, no ceasefire necessary. It's unconditional surrender. And he pushed them out. And then you had Shiloh, where the first day the Union suffered serious setbacks. And overnight, General Lew Wallace came with reinforcements. And the next day, they pushed the Confederates out and on down toward Mississippi. And then, of course, we had the Siege of Cincinnati. September 1st, 1862, General Wright got a message that General Heath had between 8,000 and 10,000 troops marching on Cincinnati. General Heath's goal was $15 million or burn the city. General Wright sent a message to General Lew Wallace and he said, if you haven't left Cincinnati, stay and defend it. If you have left, return and defend it. Lew Wallace was down at about Paris in Kentucky. As his engines were turning around at the round table, he met with his staff and he said, there's nothing in Cincinnati to defend it with. I have less than 5,000 troops. We'll have to use the topography. Lew Wallace came back to Cincinnati, and on September 2nd, declared martial law in Cincinnati, Covington, and Newport. He ordered every able-bodied man to report at 9 o'clock in the morning. And one of the saddest days in this whole event was involving the black men. When the war first broke out, the black men of Cincinnati wanted to organize just the same as any other group. We had the Neuners, the Germans. We had the Irish who had organized into their groups, and the black men wanted to organize. And the police went with fixed bayonets to the black community and said, "This is a white man's war, you'll stay out of it." And now that Cincinnati is being threatened, the police go back into the black community and order all of the able-bodied black men to report to the Plum Street Mule Station. There was a big debacle at this point because there were no bridges across the Ohio River. And to use topography, Lew Wallace was going to take the river coming down from Pittsburgh, goes up to Cincinnati and back down. He was going to make that peninsula safe harbor. He was going to build breastworks across there. He was going to clear the land south of those breastworks. And he was establishing 28 batteries. 2 of the batteries were on Price's Hill, 2 were on Mount Adams, and 24 across northern Kentucky. But the debacle was he couldn't get the men across to do the work because there was no bridge. He ordered the combat engineers to build a bridge. They said they needed 2 days. He said, "You have 1. And they put barges side by side in the river and planks in order to get the troops across, or get the civilians across. And at the same time, Lew Wallace pleaded with Governor Todd, the new governor in the state of Ohio, for help. He said, "I can send 5,000 troops from Camp Chase, and I may be able to get a couple thousand from Camp Dennison." But he put out a call to the people. Every able-bodied man who had his own rifle, his own ammunition, and could shoot straight should report to Cincinnati. Keep a record of your train fare, and the state will reimburse it. 15,766 men reported. They were over in northern Kentucky, and the breastworks were being built. The black men had gone over the first day, and the soldiers began using them for menial tasks, polish officers' boots, and things of that nature. And when Lew Wallace heard it, he was angry. And he put William Dixon in charge of the Black Brigade, as they became known. Dixon met with the black men the end of the first night, and he told them, "We don't know how long this is going to last. Go home and put your affairs in order." But promise me you'll come back on the morrow. He sent 405 men home. The next morning, over 700 came back with their own shovels, picks, axes, and they performed admirably. General Heath came up from Lexington. Well, he had been at Richmond, and between Richmond and Lexington when he got authorization to take the troops. Depending which account you read, he had between 10 and 20,000 troops. They camped at Walton, Kentucky, and they sent their scouts out. The scouts found out that we had these breastworks and batteries. They went back and they told General Heath, "There's 70,000 troops," which wasn't true. 50,000 were civilians. But they said he had 70,000 troops, 10 miles of breastworks. And they've got these fellows that don't have to shoot at the same squirrel twice. And thus, those fellows who reported at the behest of Governor Todd became known as the squirrel hunters. General Heath turned around and went back to Lexington, the most signal victory of the Civil War. Not one cannonball was fired, and there were a few soldiers that were lost in skirmishes with the scouts. And what was this escapade of Heath coming to Cincinnati? It was a diversion tactic. It was to keep Lew Wallace and the troops in the Western Theater occupied, because Lee was making an incursion into the north. Lee came into Antietam. I was on bended knee in the White House praying to Almighty God that he would give us a victory, a significant victory, in order that I could issue an Emancipation Proclamation. And you say, but Lincoln, you promised you wouldn't interfere with the institution of slavery where it existed. But I also took an oath of office that I would preserve the Union and the Constitution. If I have no Union, what good is the Constitution? The victory came. The Battle of Antietam, September 17, 1862. The bloodiest battle in American history. But a single-day battle, I need to clarify that, in American history. I went to my cabinet on the 22nd of September, and I gave them an Emancipation Proclamation, and I said, gentlemen, this document is no longer for comment nor critique. Spread it among the people. I gave the rebels 100 days. Lay down your weapons, cease hostilities, restore representation in Washington. But none of them did. And so, in between then and the 1st of January, the 100 days was up then, I met with Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist. And Frederick said, Lincoln, you're missing the boat. You need to tell every black person that they can fight in the Union Army. And I said, Congress passed that way back last July. That's already in law. He said, you need to tell them. And so I amended the Emancipation Proclamation that I had originally issued to include blacks could be in the Union Army. And on January 1, 1863, I signed that document, not as president, but as commander-in-chief of the Army and the Navy. And that distinction is so important, because if I had signed it as president, it would be subject to judicial review. If I signed it as commander-in-chief, it is not subject to the court system. However, it also limited it. As commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy, it's not effective except where they're in rebellion. It wasn't effective in Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri, the western counties of Virginia, or the 17 parishes of Louisiana. And where it was to be effective, it couldn't be enforced unless we had a military presence. With that signature, I forever changed the course of American history and the course of the war. You see, our anaconda plan, are you familiar with the anaconda snake? How it wraps its prey and squeezes the life out of it? Well, our anaconda plan had been to put blockades around all the southern ports. They could not get their cotton out. France and England wanted the cotton, so England was building ramming boats France and England were both going to enter negotiations on the side of the South, and they were going to try to influence world opinion in order to have the Confederacy recognized. But now that I have signed this Emancipation Proclamation, we moved from a limited war to a war of unconditional surrender, and we moved from a war over states' rights and economic issues to definitely a war over slavery. And now neither France nor England will risk negative world opinion, since the issue is slavery. They will not come in on the side of the rebels. Horace Greeley had written in the New York Times that 20 million people were clamoring for me to issue this proclamation. And now they have it. But then there are still those who aren't satisfied. The war raged on. We had battles, Vicksburg, for example. General Grant was trying to get the Mississippi opened for traffic. Pemberton had 30,000 troops at Vicksburg. Grant tried everything possible. He sent boats down, armed boats, ironclad boats down the Mississippi, trying to bombard and break open the Mississippi. He wasn't successful. He attempted to build a canal around Vicksburg, but the walls of the canal kept crumbling in that soil. They tunneled in under the Rodans, and his troops went in doing hand-to-hand combat for 30 hours. Couldn't break it. And so he had the siege of Vicksburg. Pemberton's 30,000 troops couldn't get food in. And after 40 days, Pemberton surrendered. And in a stroke of genius, Grant negotiated that loyalty oaths would be taken from Pemberton's men, and they would be sent home to their farms on a loyalty oath. Why was this important? Grant had difficulty feeding just his troops and the slaves who had reported to him. Those slave men joining his ranks as fighters, but the families had to be fed. If Grant had taken Pemberton's 30,000 men as prisoners, he's responsible to feed them. Since he didn't take them as prisoners, but sent them home, they will feed themselves. At the same time that we had this siege, Lee has tried another incursion into the north. This time he figures that if he gets into the north and creates enough disturbance, the politicians will be under pressure to capitulate and allow the rebels to go their merry way. However, I finally had enough with Hooker, and I replaced him with General Meade, and we had the Battle of Gettysburg. It was at the same time as the end of the Siege of Vicksburg. It was on July 4th, 1863, that I got word that the rebels had been crushed. And I ordered Meade to pursue them. But it didn't happen because the Potomac was high at that point, and I thought they can't get back across the river. Let's bring it to an end. But Meade said his men were exhausted and he didn't follow them. The river went down and the rebels got across. I recognized at this point that through most of our lives, we have been preserved in peace and prosperity. But we have forgotten God. We have forgotten the gracious hand of Him who multiplied and sustained us in the peace. We vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all these blessings are the result of some superior wisdom or virtue of our own. Intoxicated by this unbroken success, we have become too proud to recognize the need for redeeming and preserving grace. Too proud to pray to our Creator. And so I set aside August 6, 1863 as a day of national thanksgiving. And I trust you assembled in your respective houses of worship to pay homage to your Creator. Well, the war continued to rage on. And then we had the problem. You see, at Gettysburg, we had 170,000 troops, 50,000 casualties, and over 7,000 dead. And the dead had been buried very hastily. But with the fall weather coming, there was the fear that these bodies would become unearthed. And so the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania purchased ground from that battlefield. And they set up a way to disinter and then reinter all of the bodies. And that was when they decided we have a National Soldier Cemetery here. And Edwin Everett would be the speaker to give the dedicatory address. Now, if you don't know about Everett, he's a former senator of Massachusetts, former governor of Massachusetts, former president of Harvard, and probably the best orator this land has ever had. However, I wasn't invited. The dedication was to take place on October 19th. But Edward Everett needed 30 more days to prepare, and he asked for a 30-day delay, which they granted. The dedication was rescheduled for November 19th. And in that 30 days, the Secretary of State Seward managed to get an invitation for me to attend. And on the bottom of my invitation was penned by Judge Davis Wills that if I was present at the conclusion of the dedication, I would be introduced. And I could make a few comments setting aside the grounds for their intended purpose. I thought long and hard about what I needed to say. I had decided that it should be a conciliatory speech. I would not mention the Confederacy. I would look to the past. I would look at the present. But more importantly, I would look to the future. Secretary of State Seward arranged my transportation, and he had me going up on the morning of the 19th to Gettysburg. And I told him, oh no, we can't take a chance that there will be a skirmish along the way and I might miss the whole affair. And so I ordered that he change those arrangements. And we went up on the evening of the 18th. In the morning of the 19th, I walked the battlefield and I came face to face with the horrors of that battle. And after Edward Everett had spoken for 2 hours, I was introduced, and you have heard what I had to say. Now I'm constantly asked, how much longer will this war continue? My friends, the war in magnitude and duration has exceeded what either side expected at the onset. And if God wills that it continue until every bit of the wealth piled high by the bondsman's unrequited toil shall be sunk, or until every drop of blood drawn by the lash shall be paid by blood drawn by the sword, still it must be said, as was said over 3,000 years ago, that the Lord is true and righteous altogether. So with malice toward none, with charity for all, pursuing the right as God gives us to see the right, let us finish this task that we have begun. Care for those who shall have borne the battle, and their widows and their orphans, and secure a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. And to those of you who have been wondering, is it correct that we erect the bronze, marble, and granite monuments and statues to those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice on the fields of battle in defense of our liberty and our independence? I say yes. But I believe it important that you recognize there is a more enduring monument to those who have given their life, and that is found in the hearts and the lives of each one of us who love liberty equally for ourselves and for all mankind. What questions do you have?
Who has a question for President Lincoln? Right here.
Name's Bill, and it's been noted that you have attended a lot of battles in the Civil War. Why did you go so close to the front?
I believe that leadership should not ask of others what they are unwilling to give of themselves. I cannot know, just from reading the reports, what is going on in the front lines. And I need for those men to know that I care enough that I will be present where they have to be.
More questions right here.
Hi, I'm Pam. I've heard some conflicting reports as to how many copies of the Gettysburg Address are around. I've heard there's 2 that were to your secretaries, 1 towards or for Everett, and then 2 for a historian, George Bancroft, and his son-in-law. Can you clarify how many actual copies there were?
Unfortunately, no. I do know that in some of the historical books, you will find 5. I know that I should take off my coat to do this. I'm sorry, I've broken character to answer that question. If I don't have my coat on, I'm not Lincoln. I do know that the Presidential Library and Museum, the museum, has a couple of copies. I believe that they are copies of copies. One of them does not have the term "under God" in it. And the Association of Lincoln Presenters took their former museum director to task for that. And because we believe that Lincoln did include "under God." Unfortunately, there's nothing definitive. However, we still believe that he did. And that becomes a big discussion all of itself. And just let me tell you, at the beginning of the war, Lincoln read to all the troops that any officer who used profanity against his men would be court-martialed. He had that read every Sunday for the first year of the war. So why would he not put "under God" in? The other thing is that he sent a letter to one of his friends, and he said that Gettysburg was his Golgotha. If Gettysburg was his Golgotha, "under God" would certainly be the forepoint of his mind. And I believe that it was included. But I can't answer your question definitively.
President Lincoln, was your cabinet on your side, or were you constantly fighting them?
Yes and yes. They were on my side as long as things were going well. Some of them took exception to my suspending the writ of habeas corpus. My argument in suspending that was that the Constitution provides for it in the case of rebellion. Can you argue that we're not in rebellion? Let's face it. And so I was very adamant in that. They were upset about Van Lanningham and my treatment of him. And here I asked I should authorize a deserter to be shot and not do anything about the wily orator that enticed him to desert? I think not. And so I do not feel that I did anything wrong. To entice military to desert their posts affects the safety of the people, and therefore I am upholding the Constitution in providing for that safety.
Right, here's a question right here, President.
Hi, my name is Jim, and this is going to have to be answered in an out of character status. As President Lincoln, your comments this evening were really inspiring, really, what can I say, heartwarming. Were your comments taken from speeches that Mr. Lincoln actually made to Congress or to groups in the public?
Yes, yes.
Right here.
Hi, my name's Ray. As President Lincoln, what were your plans for the South had you lived after the war was over and we had won?
Well, probably the biggest indication of my plans for the South was in my April 11th, 1865 speech before Congress regarding Louisiana. Louisiana wanted to come back into the Union. There were many in Congress who wanted me to have a 50% loyalty oath from the people residing there. And I asked them, if your brother goes to Europe and sojourns and then wants to come back, do you not welcome him with open arms? If we have a 10% loyalty oath, Are we not the stronger? Surely they're not going to pick up weapons again. My whole point, and I made this very clear when I spoke with General Grant at Harper's Ferry prior to the surrender of Robert E. Lee, let them up gently. Do not take everything that will make them feel a person. Let them have their pride. That doesn't take away from the fact that they are surrendering. And I believe that we can count on Robert E. Lee to aid us in rehabilitating those who were soldiers into the fabric of American society.
President Lincoln, we have a question online right back here, please.
We have a question from Millie. Can you tell us about Anna Ella Carroll and how she contributed to any decisions or strategies you used in the war?
Anna Tarbell?
Anna Ella Carroll?
Carroll. I don't recognize that name.
Maybe it is Tarbell.
Sorry, I will have to consult my diary.
More questions for the president right here.
My name is Dan, and President Lincoln, can you share with us General Grant? I know he liked to enjoy a good stiff drink. Did you ever drink with him? And can you share some of your thoughts about Grant? I feel there was a bit of a friendship with him.
Well, the first thing you need to know about General Grant is I had never met General Grant until I promoted him. And when I was reading the reports on Grant, he was like a bulldog on a bone. Once he got started, he wouldn't let go. I needed somebody who would be that tenacious. Now they said that Grant drank too much. The word on the Washington streets is that I asked what brand of liquor is he drinking, and I'll provide it for all my generals. I could trust the man. I didn't always agree with him. In fact, I one time sending a message, as I was prone to do with several of the generals, I tried to be more of a fatherly figure than commander-in-chief of the Army and the Navy. And that got me into trouble with some of them because they would try and bypass the chain of command. They considered it as fatherly advice, and they wouldn't take it as a directive, and they wouldn't consider what I had to say, and that caused me a great deal of consternation. But in General Grant's case, I disagreed with him. He did it his way, and I had to send him a letter telling him he was right, I was wrong. I wasn't afraid to do that. And I believe that that type of rapport gave me stature with Grant. And yes, we could sit down and talk. Now, Julia, that's a different story with Mary.
Back on the question online, President.
Sure.
A listener is wondering if you know anything about the vacant chair in the painting of you presenting the Emancipation Proclamation to your cabinet. They're thinking the painting might be by Carpenter. I'm wondering if that vacant chair has any real significance.
I have never looked much at the photos, and so that one also escapes me. If you'll jot those down, I will see what I can learn about them, and I will give you feedback.
Here's a question right here.
Hi, my name is Graydon. Was the war fought for anything else besides slavery?
Yes. In the early part of the war, I had said I would not interfere with the institution of slavery where it existed, but I would not allow slavery to expand. into the territories. Now, this became a problem for the South. It was an economic issue. Their farming practices were depleting the soil. They had to be able to expand if that type of labor was to be of real benefit. And so that's why I said that when I signed the Emancipation Proclamation, we went from a war, some said it was already over slavery, others said it was economic issues. And the economic issues were the South was being taxed considerably on their exports. The taxation was being used more in the North to build manufacturing capabilities. And so that was unfair to the South. And I was willing to work with them on that, but they didn't choose to work with me.
Mr. President, you wrote many fragments. There's one in particular that I would like, if you would be so kind, to read and tell us about.
This is entitled Fragment on the Constitution and the Union. All this is not the result of accident. It has a philosophical cause. Without the Constitution and the Union, we could not have attained the results, but even these are not the primary cause of our great prosperity. There is something back of these, entwining itself more closely about the human heart. That something is the principle of liberty to all. The principle that clears the path for all, gives hope to all, and by consequence, utter enterprise and industry to all. The expression of that principle in our Declaration of Independence was most happy and fortunate. Without this, as well as with it, we could have declared our independence of Great Britain, but without it, we could not, I think, have secured our free government and consequent prosperity. No oppressed people will fight and endure, as our fathers did, without the promise of something better than a mere change of masters. The assertion of that principle at that time was the word, fitly spoken, which has proved an apple of gold to us. The Union and the Constitution are the picture of silver, subsequently framed around it. The picture was made not to conceal or destroy the apple, but to adorn and preserve it. The picture was made for the apple, not the apple for the picture. So let us act that neither picture or apple shall ever be blurred or bruised or broken. That we may so act, we must study and understand the points of danger. I have long held that the Union really had its birth in the Declaration of Independence. That's why when I started to speak at Gettysburg, I said, 87 years ago. That was 87 years ago. I was speaking in 1863. That takes us back to 1776. That spirit was what I alluded to in my opening comments in the speech to the Lyceum in 1838, when I said that it is ours now to pass on to the last generation that fate should privilege to inherit the earth. I believe that I also talked about this when I asked the question, and I didn't use this portion of speech tonight, when I asked the question, What constitutes the bulwark of our liberty and our independence? Is it our frowning battlements? Our bristling seacoasts? No, these are not our reliance against tyranny. Our reliance is in that spirit of liberty that God has planted in the bosoms of each one of us. Our defense is the preservation of that spirit that prizes liberty as the heritage of all men in all lands everywhere. Destroy that spirit and you plant the seeds of despotism at your very doorstep.
My name's Nick. Could you clear up, there's been discussion about the Emancipation Proclamation was a temporary measure, but it was the 13th Amendment was required to finally shore up any legal challenge to abolish slavery. Can you kind of, when did you feel it was necessary, when it was necessary?
Absolutely. In fact, I risked not being reelected in 1864 because I was pushing for that 13th Amendment. I don't know if you were all aware, the Republicans changed their name to the National Union Party going into that election. And they came to me and asked if I would run. And Pride wanted the people to pass judgment on my administration. And so I said, yes, I will run. And it was my goal to avoid any possible reversion if I didn't get reelected. And so I was pushing for the 13th Amendment, and things didn't look good. And my supporters came to me and they said, Lincoln, rescind the Emancipation Proclamation and then you'll get reelected. But as it is, you won't. And I said, I can't rescind it. I made a vow to Almighty God. I will not go back on that. Besides, I feel slavery is morally wrong. They said, well, then stop pushing for this 13th Amendment. And my position was, if we don't get the 13th Amendment through before I leave office, it will never happen. McClellan is promising all sorts of things, none of which include freedom for the slaves in the 13th Amendment. They said, well, then call off the election. You can do that, we're in rebellion. And I said, if I call off the election, the rebels have won already. And then the National Union Party scheduled in Cincinnati, Ohio, on September 28th, 1863, a conference in order to remove my name from the ballot. But Sherman began winning as he was going through Georgia, and the tide of public opinion changed, and they never held that conference. And I arranged for every soldier who couldn't vote by absentee ballot that his general could possibly release him to go home and vote. Let him go vote and come back.
President Lincoln, for a couple of the younger members of our audience, you faced quite a bit of adversity before you became president. Would you be able to speak about any of the things that happened?
Oh, life is full of pitfalls. When you talk about adversity, I never had a formal education to speak of. I got my education formal education by the little, so I went to school for a little while, and then the teacher left, and then I got to go back to school when they found another teacher who could read, write, and cipher to the rule of three, and then father needed help in the fields, and I didn't get to go to school. Well, anyway, if you put all of my littles together back to back, I have less than 1 year of formal schooling. Now, I tried to run a general store with Mr. Berry. Mr. Berry became ill. He left. I was saddled with all the debts. The sheriff came and he said that the creditors wanted their money. I said, I'll pay them when I get the money. They said, you misunderstand. They want it now. And so he took everything I had and he sold it at auction. One of my friends bought back my surveying equipment, and so I could make a little money doing surveying. And I took a job as postmaster. I ran for election, won 277 votes out of 300 at New Salem. However, you have to win more than your little town if you're going to be re-elected. And so I was defeated. I went back 2 years later and ran again, and I was elected. I did, incidentally, pay off all of those debts, those creditors, but it took me until 1849 to get them all paid. I had to find mentors who would help me. That was the way I learned how to survey. That was the way I learned to be a lawyer. But then after I was married and we had our second child, he was 4 years old and we lost him. That was a terrible hardship. Well, I had a third born and then a fourth born. And while we were in the White House, the third born, William Wallace, became ill with the bilious fever and we lost him. When I was ready to go to Gettysburg, Mary pleaded with me through tears, "Do not go. I can't stand to lose another child." For Tad was very ill. And I said, "My duty calls. I must go." Fortunately, Tad recovered. But those are just some of the things. But you need to know that there were some glorious times. I'll tell you one or two incidents with Tad because they're so humorous. And one day he came into my office. It was on the second floor of the White House. And he had a gentleman with him, and he turns to the fellow and he says, "What's your name?" And the guy told him, and he says, "Dad, I'd like you to meet Mr. So-and-so." And then he turns to Mr. So-and-so and he said, "I'd like you to meet my father, the president." Okay. I thought, I didn't know what had happened that caused this, but Tad left with the gentleman. It wasn't much later than here he is back with another fellow. And he comes up and he says to the fellow, "Now, what is your name?" And the gentleman told him, and he introduces him. And so this time, as he was turning to leave, I said, "Tad, wait a minute." And what's going on? He said, "Well, you know, the Sanitary Commission was wanting money to buy bandages for the soldiers. And I had already emptied my piggy bank the last time and I gave them everything I had. And so I'm trying to make a little money. So I tell them, I go up and down the avenue, and if anybody wants to meet the president, I tell them it'll cost you a nickel."
Got one last question here, Mr. President, one quick one.
Mr. President, my name is Dennis, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what it was like going through the circuit in central Illinois, Hartsburg, Lincoln, those towns around that area, and appearing in court for them.
Riding the circuit took me away from first, well, when I was down in New Salem before I was, and going up to Vandalia, took me away from home. It wasn't so bad before I was married, but after I was married, why, Mary seemed to object to my being gone so much. So that was hard from the first part. The second part was that you never knew what cases you were going to draw when you got there, and you had very little time to prepare. Sometimes they were humorous, and one time a fellow came up to me and he wanted me to take a case that he said the gentleman owed him $2.50. Well, I happened to have known the fellow that owed the money, and I said, "Well, he doesn't have it. I'm sure he would pay it if he had it." He said, "Oh, I want it. It's a matter of principle." And I said, "It'll cost you more than what you're going to get. That's all right, it's principle. I said, fine, give me $10. And he gave me $10, and I went to the gentleman who owed the money, and I said, do you owe him $250? He said, yes, but I don't have it. I said, here's $5. Show up in court tomorrow, pay him the $250. You've got $250 for your trouble, and I've got $5 for mine.
Mr. President, thank you for coming to EmpowerU tonight. We greatly appreciate your visit. Thank you very much. And the president does have a real name, and his real name is Stan Wernz. So let's thank him one more time. And I just have a couple quick things to tell you before we let you go. Quick things. So Diane Landy, who's one of our frequent visitors, sponsored this class. I think she's watching tonight. Can we thank her for helping us? If you're looking for a great charity to help with for the holidays, this is our Fill the Truck campaign. Grab a bag on your way out, put some canned vegetables in it or fruit. It would be a great thing to do. So we've got 2 huge cakes to celebrate this great 155th anniversary of President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Please grab one on the way out. We will begin our 17th season of EmpowerU on February 26th. 2019. We look forward to seeing you all. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone.
You remind me of Dave Schaefer.
Hi, I'm Dave Schaefer. How are you, sir?
I'm
Do you
fine.
remember Tricia?
Oh, I sure do.
You probably remember her more than me, right?
Oh.
As soon as we